Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to take a minute to thank everyone who has been listening to the show, whether recently or even since it started back in 2019. The people who have listened, shared, and supported the show in many wonderful and kind ways. The show is still here, thanks to you. And if you would like to support Sleepy Time Tales, to help me to keep it ad-free and going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can also get you fun bonuses based on how much you contribute. And there are goal-based bonuses that go out to all listeners when we reach those goals. But if a monthly contribution seems a bigger ask, then you can make once-off tips through buymeacoffee.com/sleepytimetales or the tip jar on the website. I've also got some merchandise up on a Redbubble store, which you can read through the show notes or via the website at sleepytimetales.net. But another huge way to help the show is simply to spread the word. A lot of people out there are struggling to sleep, so if you know someone who is cranky and listless thanks to their struggles, just tell them about Sleepy Time Tales. And if you tell people on social media, please make sure to tag me in at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter, so I can see and I can thank you. Funny enough, I had someone mention me to their listeners recently, I think, but it was from a private account, so I couldn't see who it was to thank them properly. But you know who you are, and thank you very much. And last but not least, of course, I need to shout out the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. Their music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. And thanks for your patience. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended mostly to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night. But maybe you need something more like background noise or even just company. That's why I make these episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you, without any pressure of the end coming anytime soon. Now, as far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The primary idea is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for you. But maybe you need something different. Maybe you just need a little bit of background noise. People these days like to listen to music or white noise or the sound of the trees, wind in the trees, or the sound of the ocean, or maybe some boring dude just droning on in the background. But however you're engaging with the show, it's very important that you don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the tale and allow the need for sleep to come for you naturally. Now obviously I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important that you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, this probably won't work for you. It will probably take a few nights. I recommend giving it a solid 3 nights to get used to listening to my voice or my accent, or maybe one episode just isn't long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep. Maybe your problem is waking up in the middle of the night. What I recommend, because of what works for me, is to let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes onto your podcast player and playlist them enough to get you through the night, and then let them go. That way, if the stream is still running and you find yourself awake at 3 a.m., you can just pop your earbuds in and allow yourself to go straight back to sleep. Something that happens to a lot of people as well is they wake up a little bit before their alarm, 60 minutes or even 30 minutes, and I recommend you do the same thing. Again, if the podcast is just playing, pop your earbuds back in if they've fallen out, or carry on listening on your however else you listen, and get a few more for extra 40 winks. I've actually had people thank me for this recommendation because there is something about allowing yourself complete relaxation right before your alarm that is satisfying on a whole new level. But whether it's early night, midnight, or early in the morning, it's important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this will probably seem strange to you. So I ask that you give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. The Hill of Adventure by Cornelia Meigs. Chapter 3. Neighbours. Do you remember, said Nancy, as she and Beatrice viewed each other across a wilderness of overflowing trunks, half-unpacked boxes of bedding, baskets of china, and packages of groceries. Do you remember how that Englishman at your sorority dance used to talk about an affair like this as settling in? Settling wouldn't be so hard, but settling in. Will all this stuff ever go inside this house? I don't know, replied Beatrice abstractedly. It will have to go in somehow. Surely we need everything that is here. She spoke absently, for the mention of the dance had brought a sudden flood of memories and of odd fancies. It had been the last one she had attended before the doctor's verdict concerning Aunt Anna's health, which had upset all their plans and driven them west. It must have been in another world, she thought, that evening at the country club, with the moonlight coming in on the polished floor, with the whirling maze of coloured dresses, the swinging music, and the soft sound of multitudes of sliding feet. She stepped out upon the stone doorstep and looked down between the giant red trunks of the pine trees, down upon the white thread of road winding to the valley, upon the huddle of box-like houses with the slow smoke rising from the blackened ruins in the midst. A wave of panic seized her. Would she know how to manage affairs in the strange new world, this place of rugged lonely peaks, pine-forested mountainsides, of narrow valleys filled with rioting men? Yet panic was followed by sudden exhilaration, born perhaps of the strange clearness of the thin air and the brilliance of the morning sunshine. She remembered the dance again, how she had been manager of it, and how the evening had been full of congratulations on the success of her arrangements. Yet in the midst of it she had felt a vague discontent, a sudden wonder whether this was all the pleasure that life had to offer. Well, she thought now, with a long breath of fresh sparkling air, if she could hold her own in that world, she could in this also. And she returned to her work. Nancy, quite untroubled by any doubts or fancies, was plodding steadily ahead at the task in hand. It had been no hardship for her to rise early, explore the possibilities of the kitchen, concoct a breakfast out of such supplies as they had brought with them, and carry it in on a tray with a beaming and triumphant smile. Aunt Anna had seemed to have suffered little harm from the midnight flitting, and was sleeping late after the excitements of the night before. She had been made comfortable at once in the one room that was in tolerable order, for the girls had only to make up the couch with the bedding they had brought, to build a fire out of the pine cones that lay so thickly under the trees, and the apartment was ready for the invalid. Christina had taken charge of the place for the former occupants, and had left it very clean and in order. In the dry Montana air, no house, even when closed for months, grows damp, nor in the clean pine woods, even very dusty. Aunt Anna had remained long awake, however, for 2 hours later, when it was almost dawn, Beatrice had stolen in and found her staring wide-eyed at the fire. "Can I do anything for you? Aren't you very tired?" the girl had asked. But her aunt only smiled and shook her head. "I'm very comfortable," she said. "I think we're going to be very happy in this strange little house. I'm glad you had the courage to bring me here, my child." Beatrice stood beside the bed and straightened the coverlid. "Won't you tell me why you wanted so much to stay?" she begged. "I wish I might know." Her aunt did not answer for a moment. "I used to think," she said at last, "that you might never know. But perhaps since last night I've changed my mind." "Yes. Whatever happens, I believe I will tell you. But not just now, for I'm too weary to go through with such a thing. Move my pillow a little, my dear. I'm going to sleep. The music of that waterfall would make anybody drowsy." Before they had finished breakfast, Christina had appeared, with Sam, heavy laden, following her, bringing more of their things from the village. "I just packed everything that I thought you would need and had Sam fetch it up," said Christina. "No, you can't go to the town until things have quieted a little. There was fighting last night and Dan O'Leary has been shot." "Just through the leg," Sam reassured them, seeing Nancy's horrified face. "Dan has been foreman of one of the ditching gangs, but he owns the livery stable and one of the stores. So being a property holder makes him more careful than the rest. He's hot-headed enough, though, and was leader of all the workmen until this fellow out of Russia, Thorvik, came to town. He goes Dan one better, and there is no knowing what he won't stir up." "Is the strike going to last long?" Beatrice asked. Sam chuckled. "It's not a strike. That's just where the pinch is." While they were holding their meeting last night and arguing about how soon they should quit, there comes word from the company that the work is shut down until further notice. Something has gone wrong with the money end of the business, people say, and there's nothing to go on with. Anyway, there's no strike. The men higher up beat them to it. Christina is right. The city of Eli is no place for young ladies to be going just now. "There's room in the shed for your horse, Miss Beatrice," he announced when he had made his last trip. "I can bring him up if you like, and you would have to take care of him yourself. We can haul up enough feed to keep him, and there's some grazing land higher up the hill." Accordingly, it was settled that Buck also was to be a part of their establishment, although Beatrice felt a little appalled at the prospect of taking care of a horse single-handed. "Bless you, he's that wise that he can almost take care of himself," Sam reassured her. "He's a little light on his feet when you go to saddle him, but beyond that he hasn't a fault. It will be a good thing to have a horse on the place." Toward noon, the two girls, with Christina's assistance, began to bring some order out of the confusion. The cabin possessed 4 rooms downstairs. The large living room into which the front door opened, the bedroom off it, the lean-to kitchen, and, wonder of wonders, a tiny bathroom with a shining white porcelain tub. Those engineers who used the place just settled down to make themselves comfortable, Christina explained. They put in the water pipes themselves. And I'll never forget the day they brought up that tub, packed on a mule. He bucked it off once and it slid down the hill until it caught between 2 pine trees. The enterprising former tenants had also introduced electricity from the power plant to the nearest mine, so that the 2 most difficult housekeeping problems of water and light were thus already solved. The heavy table and straight clumsy chairs must also have been brought there by their predecessors, and the bunks into the 2 little rooms under the roof must have been their work. The men had evidently slept on pine branches, but for the girls, Sam brought mattresses from the house in the village, and a comfortable bed for Aunt Anna. "Now," said Nancy at last, "we have everything we need except milk and eggs." "I believe," said Christina, who was scrubbing the big table, "that over at John Herrick's, he's your nearest neighbour, he could spare you what milk and eggs you want. I know they have a cow and that his girl Hester makes a great deal of her chickens." Neighbours. Beatrice had forgotten that house, nearly hidden by the shoulder of the mountain, but visible from the trail below. There was a girl there too, perhaps of their own age. She was eager to go and investigate at once and scarcely waited to hear how to find the way. It was a long walk down to the road beyond the bars and then up the hill to the next house. Beatrice realized as she tramped along that distances are deceitful in high altitudes, and that the presence of Buck would be a great convenience. The house, when she reached it, was even larger than she had thought. A long, low dwelling, with a row of sheds and stables and an enclosed corral. She had just reached the front steps when she saw the door fly open, and a brown-haired girl with very bright, dancing eyes came running out in a flutter of dark curls and flying blue and white skirts. "Oh, oh," cried Hester Herrick, grasping Beatrice's hand in a cordial brown one. "I thought there was smoke in your chimney, and I couldn't wait to know who was living in the cabin. To have neighbours. You can't think what it means on this mountain. Come in, come in." To Beatrice, who had observed with some distaste the flimsy houses of the village, the sagging boardwalks and streets full of ruts and boulders, this place was a delightful surprise. With its air of spruce neatness and picturesque charm. She liked the outside of the building, the pointed gables and wide eaves. But as Hester conducted her within, she gave a little gasp of wonder, for the house was really beautiful inside. Beauty in a house, to her, had always meant shining white woodwork, softly coloured rugs, and polished mahogany. But there was nothing of all that here. The low room with its windows opening toward the distant mountains was full of rich colours. The dull red of the unsealed pine walls and bookcases, the odd browns and yellows in the bearskin rugs, the clear flame colour of the bowl of wild lilies that stood on the broad windowsill. Hester seated her guest in the corner of a large, comfortable couch, and sat down beside her with a smile of broad satisfaction. It was difficult to bring up such a prosaic subject as milk and eggs in such pleasant surroundings. But when that had been disposed of, the 2 were soon chattering as though they had known each other for years. "Yes," commented Hester, nodding sagely as she heard the tale of their departure for the cabin on the hill. "There is going to be real trouble in Eddie, so Roddy says, and he won't let me go down there just now." How glad I am that you didn't go away. Beatrice's eyes had been roving about the room, observing the white birch log on the hearth, the tawny orange shade of the homespun curtains, and even the pictures on the wall. "Why," she exclaimed, her glance arrested by a photograph hanging near the window. "We have that same picture at home, in my father's study. It's of the school where he used to go." Hester looked up at the vine-covered archway showing a tree-lined walk beyond. "I don't know where Roddy got it," she said. "It's always been there, over his desk, for as long as I can remember." "Who is Roddy, your brother?" Beatrice asked. "No, he's my sort of father, but not really. He's too young to be my father, I suppose. He adopted me when I was very little. His name is John Rodman Herrick, so as he's only 15 years older, I call him Roddy. I can't remember when I didn't live in this house with him, and with old Julia and her husband Tim to do the work for us. There's Roddy now." The stride of heavy boots sounded along the veranda, and a man came in. A handsome, vigorous person who, as Hester had said, looked too young to be her father. Nor were they the least alike in appearance, since he was very fair, with thick light hair and blue eyes that contrasted oddly with his very sunburnt skin. He wore ordinary riding clothes, but seemed to carry an air of distinction in his clean-cut profile and straight shoulders. He listened to Hester's rather confused account of Beatrice's arrival and shook hands with her gravely. "Are you going to be comfortable in the cabin?" he asked. "Who is helping you get settled?" "There's a Finnish woman who is doing everything for us," Beatrice told him. "I've never seen anyone who worked so hard." She told how she had first met Christina in the wood, and what gratitude and assistance the woman had given them later. "Poor Christina. She can never put that boy out of her mind," John Herrick said. "He was a good fellow, Olaf Jensen, and I've missed him since he left Ellie. He was always in some mischief or other, and his last escapade before he went to sea came near to being serious. There are still men in the village telling what they will do to him when he gets back." "What is it he did?" Beatrice asked. John Herrick began to laugh. "Olaf was working with one of our ditching gangs, and a good workman he was. Suddenly one day while they were digging near the river, Olaf pointed to a high rock opposite, called Mason's Bluff, a well-known and dangerous place. There seemed to be a man hanging up by a rope halfway down the face of it, unable apparently to get either up or down. The labourers didn't take much interest, said anyone was a fool who would try such a climb, and not one of them would budge an inch to help him. Then Olaf remarked casually, 'It must be that scientist fellow who was in our camp yesterday. Do you remember that rich tenderfoot who went around spending money and tapping rocks?' Every man dropped his tools, for if there's a chance for a reward, the men are on the job at once. You should have seen them scurrying down to the river, getting across any way they could, and running like rabbits through the brush, each one determined to be the first on the spot." "And did they save him?" Beatrice inquired eagerly. "The first one's within 100 yards when the man fell." She gasped, but he went on with a dry chuckle. "They went nearer to pick him up and found he was a dummy man stuffed with straw. Then they remembered that Olaf had been laughing at them for being willing to do anything for money and nothing without it. And they came back to the camp, vowing to have his blood. Even I was surprised at the ugly temper they showed, but Olaf was wise enough to know how they would feel, and when they came back he was gone. Probably meant to go anyway and wanted to have one final fling." Beatrice, glancing at the clock, was horrified to see how long she had stayed and rose at once to go. Both her new friends came to the door with her. "By the way," said John Herrick as Beatrice stood on the step below, "my Hester is too informal a person for introductions, and she has not even told me your name. Indeed, I doubt if she knows it herself. Won't you tell us who you are and who is at the cabin with you?" What a cordial, friendly face he had, Beatrice thought, and how it lighted his brown face. "My Aunt Anna and my sister Nancy at the cottage with me," she said. "The place is mine. My father gave it to me. My name is Beatrice Deems." Never had she seen a countenance change so abruptly as did John Herrick's, as he turned suddenly and went into the house, leaving Hester to say her goodbyes alone. It was at the end of a very laborious but satisfactory day that Nancy came up to her sister's room to find Beatrice writing at the rough pine table. "Everything is in order and Christina and Sam have just gone," said Nancy. "There wasn't anything more you wanted them to do, was there?" "Oh, I wanted them to mail my letters," exclaimed Beatrice, seizing her envelopes and jumping up. "It took me so long to write everything to Dad that I only just finished this one that I promised Christina for her boy Olaf. Perhaps I can catch Sam at the gate." She sped down the path through the pines and was able to overtake Christina and Sam where they had paused to put up the bars. Beatrice was just explaining to the Finnish woman what she had written, when a heavy, slouching figure came up the road through the shadows, and Thorvik, in his broken English, addressed his sister roughly. "You spend the whole day here? Spend the night too? I have not yet had my supper." It was evident that he wished Beatrice also to know of his displeasure, or he would have used his own tongue. He grasped Christina angrily by the arm and shot the girl a scowling glance of such fierce enmity that involuntarily she shrank back behind the gate. It was difficult under that frowning scrutiny to hand the 2 letters to Sam. The more so since Christina eyed one of the envelopes with such nervous apprehension. Even a duller eye than Thorvik's might have noted that the letter was of special importance to her. The sullen animosity deepened on the man's face. "You make nothing more with my sister, see?" he said, as he led Christina away. Sam nodded a subdued good night, clucked low-spiritedly to his horses, and drove slowly after the two. Even his unquenched cheerfulness seemed affected by the instinctive dread of Thorvik's sour ill temper. Nor was it with a very cheerful heart that Beatrice walked back alone up the path. It rendered her task of living by no means easier to realize that she had made an enemy of such a man as Thorvik. Yet the light from her cabin, shining small and yellow beneath the giant pines, seemed somehow to rekindle her failing courage. Those 2 dearly beloved people were there within, Nancy and Aunt Anna. Surely the way would be shown to her to care for them and keep them safe. Chapter 4. Sherlock Holmes. It was a week later, and Beatrice, with a landscape of blue mountains and green forest beyond her through the open door, was standing on the threshold in her riding clothes. "I have finished my share of the housework and I am off for a ride," she said to Nancy. Her sister smiled broadly over her dusting. "I would never have thought," she declared, "that you could carry a horse and split the kindling before breakfast, and that I could scrub floors and wash dishes every day, and that we both of us would like it. There must be something strange in this mountain air." They had begun to feel as settled as though they had been at their housekeeping in the cabin for months. The cottage itself was a different place, an entrancingly pleasant and comfortable one. Hester Herrick, with whom they were now great friends, was always bringing them things. Some big black andirons for the great fireplace, a collection of soft pine pillows, and the thick bearskin rug that lay before the hearth. Roddy said you were to have it. He shot the bear himself last winter, she said, when the girls protested that this last gift was too great a one. Sam had also brought a bashfully presented offering, the pelt of a mountain lion which now served as Aunt Anna's bedside rug. Nancy had put up blue white-bordered curtains at the little square windows, and had set on the white sills a pot of red berries, boxes of ferns, and bowls of bright-faced pansies. With the fresh wind fluttering the curtains and the sunshine lying in patches on the white-scrubbed floor, the little cabin was as gay and homelike a place as heart could desire. Christina, in spite of Thorvik's interdiction, still came every day. This morning she arrived earlier than usual, with her marketing in a big basket and the mail, for it was not even yet a good thing for the girls to go often to the village. She took some letters into their Aunt Anna and remained for some time, since Aunt Anna appeared to be asking her questions. No, the girls heard Christina say, through the door. There is no one of your name hereabouts. But Olaf and I have only lived in this valley 10 years, so it might have been before. Beatrice looked up startled. What had her aunt been asking? And why should there be of anyone of their name living in this far-off place? She remembered her former wonder concerning the brother of whom they had never heard anything at home. But Christina came out and closed the door. The bright morning was calling, and Beatrice forgot her curiosity in looking forward to her ride. Don't you want to go, Nancy? She said as she went through the kitchen. No, returned Nancy briskly. I don't care for riding as you do, and this morning I would not go for anything. Christina is going to teach me how to make bread. The exploration of strange forests and dizzy mountainsides was nothing to Nancy, compared with the excitement of cooking something new. To saddle Buck was now a rather less difficult affair than at first, for his mistress had learned to fling the object of his hatred upon him, and then stand back, giving adroit jerks at the cinch between his kicks and plunges. When he had got his fill of bucking, he would turn his white face to her as if to say, That is all for today, now let's be off. Her expedition was doomed to delay, however, for as she was leading her pony round the corner of the house, she came upon a visitor. A total stranger, standing on the doorstep. He was apparently annoyed at finding no doorbell, and having his knock go unheard. He shuffled his feet, coughed, and rapped smartly on the door again and again, as though he were a person of such importance that he could not afford to be kept waiting. Beatrice realized suddenly how used she had become to Ellie's conventional costume of flannel shirt and high boots, since this dapper newcomer, with his pointed shoes and tight, high-waisted coat, looked not only uncomfortable but absurd. Good morning, Miss Deems. Beautiful day, is it not? Began the stranger easily. Mills is my name. Dabney Mills of the Brownsville, Montana Evening Star. My paper has sent me here, or rather I volunteered to come, to investigate this unfortunate affair going on in Broken Bow Valley. Oh, you mean the strike? Beatrice asked, rather bewildered and not knowing at all why the overdressed Mr. Mills should have sought out their remote cabin. He made a movement as though to go in, but since Beatrice seemed not at all inclined to open the door, he sat down on the step with smooth assurance, laid his hat on the stone, and took out a notebook. The affair is more like a lockout than a strike. But not exactly that either, he continued, with the irresistible fluency of speech adopted by people who talk a great deal to unwilling listeners. As I understand it, the situation is this. The Broken Bow Irrigation Company undertakes to construct the necessary dams, ditches, and sluice gates to water this dry valley. A big project in which a certain John Herrick, resident of these parts, has large interests. I did not know about John Herrick's share in it, Beatrice said. She was beginning already to catch the Western habit of dropping the title Mr. except in direct address. Since she was unwilling that the stranger should come in, for fear he would disturb and annoy Aunt Anna, and since he made no move to go away, she finally sat down herself upon the step. The money for this affair, Mills went on, was raised in part, as is usual, by the owners of the land which is to be irrigated. But the greater amount was to be subscribed by capitalists outside the valley, John Herrick pledging himself to see that the necessary sum was forthcoming. So far so good. He tapped the notebook with a stubby forefinger and went on with significant emphasis. Since there is no bank in Ely, there are often large sums in currency brought to pay the men and deposited in the irrigation company's safe. It is known that, just before this outbreak, the finances of the company were in good condition, and there was no talk of funds giving out before the work was completed. Yet when the men held a meeting to debate whether they should go on or should strike for increased wages, they had already had one increase, but Thorvik insisted it was not enough. They were served with a notice that the capital was exhausted and the construction was shut down. That is what all the trouble is about. He looked at Beatrice very wisely, but she said nothing. She was aware of Nancy standing in the door and looking at Dabney Mills's back in round-eyed astonishment. She called her sister out finally and introduced the newcomer stiffly, and motioned Nancy to sit beside her. Yes, sir, the money was gone. The polished manner of Mills's narrative dropped suddenly into the colloquial, as though the effort had been too much for him. The men mobbed the office building, demanding to know what had happened, and the officers of the unions were allowed to examine the books and even to look into the safe. But it was plain to them that all the company couldn't turn up a red cent. Been stolen, so people begin to say, but no one knows who did it. Now the men are lounging around town, idle, quarrelling, looking for trouble. Not a wheel can turn until the money is found. Nancy looked at him with inquisitive interest. And did you come to Ellie to find it? She asked. Well, why, if you put it that way, I guess I did, he answered, reddening a little, but seeming flattered on the whole by the bluntness of her question. I told the editor of my paper that it would make a big story if anyone could find out just who made away with the money. He didn't think a cub reporter could do much, but offered to come up here on my own responsibility and get to the bottom of the whole affair. It'll be a smashing big hit for me if I make good. He opened his notebook and fluttered over the leaves. Of course the sheriff is working on the job, but these country officials are no sleuths. It will take a smarter man than he is to get anywhere. I'm on my way up to interview John Herrick. He's the big man of the company and he ought to be able to give me something. But in case he won't talk, I thought I should stop and learn what I could from his neighbours. I understand you know Miss Herrick well. Now anything you can tell me will be useful. What do you know of John Herrick or his habits or his business? He waited with pencil poised. We don't know anything and we wouldn't tell you if we did, cried Nancy indignantly. It isn't hard usually to find out about people from their neighbours, Dabney Mills declared, quite unabashed. You're staying with your aunt, I understand. Perhaps if I went in and spoke to her. You will do nothing of the sort. Beatrice had found the voice of which astonishment and anger had robbed her. My aunt is not to be disturbed, and there is not the least use in asking us any more questions. Oh, well, of course, if you're going to take it like that. Dabney Mills rose and pocketed his notebook. He seemed quite unoffended and not convinced even yet that his quest was fruitless. I'll drop in again in a day or two. Beatrice walked with great dignity into the house, followed by Nancy, who could not help turning to look after the reporter as he trudged away through the pines, the cock of his hat and swagger of his shoulders showing that he did not acknowledge defeat. I do hope Aunt Anna wasn't disturbed, said Beatrice as she tiptoed into the inner room to discover her aunt propped up in the invalid chair and rocked by a gale of laughter. You did very well, my dear, as Aunt Anna said. Even his back is bristling with indignation as he marches away. I could not help overhearing with the door open, and you were both equal to the situation. What a strange, impertinent man. A boy, rather, for he is scarcely grown up. I wonder that any reputable newspaper employs him. He said he was doing this on his own responsibility and was going to sell the news to a paper later, explained Beatrice. He thinks he is going to make some startling discovery. I believe, asserted Nancy, wagging her head sagely, that when he was young and his character was forming, his mother let him read too many detective stories, and they didn't agree with him. He thinks he is Sherlock Holmes and Craig Kennedy and all the others rolled into one. That is what's the matter with him. You take a charitable view, Nancy, returned her aunt, and I rather think your diagnosis is right. But insistent, foolish people of his kind can often do a great deal of harm without intending it. Beatrice returned finally to the impatient buck and rode down the path towards the gate. It was her intention to explore some of the upper trails of the mountains today, for she had no desire to ride in the direction of the village. Once only she had been forced to go to town, and she felt very uneasy under the sullen, unfriendly gaze of the idle foreigners, lounging about the doorways or sitting in rows at the edge of the board sidewalks. She was to be delayed once more, however, by another visitor, one even more unwelcome than the first. She had dismounted to give a final jerk to the cinch of the girth, and was about to swing into the saddle again to ride through the gate, when she saw Thorvik come striding across the lowered bars. His face was red with the heat of his steep climb, and the veins stood out on his forehead below his bristling tow-colored hair. Such a face she had never seen before, distorted with anger and flushed with evil hate. He pulled a letter from his pocket as he came near and held it up. Thinking that it was for her, she stretched out her hand to take it, but he snatched it back beyond her reach. You are to look, not to have it, he said in a voice thick with rage. She saw it was addressed in a plain schoolboy hand to Mrs. Christina Jensen, Ellie, Montana. Why, she cried, it must be from that Olaf, snarled Thorvik. And why should he be writing if not because he has an answer to his letter of long ago? I told her there should be no answer. Who wrote for her? I did, returned Beatrice steadily, although her hot temper was beginning to rise within her. She made a move to remount her horse, but the man stepped forward and seized the bridle. Buck, nervous and startled, wheeled and reared, but could not jerk free of the iron grip on his bit. Thorvik moved up the path and put himself between Beatrice and the house. Terror as well as anger was beginning to take possession of her, but she faced him without flinching. You wrote it, after I forbid. His voice shook with fury. Then this is what I do with the answer. He slipped the rein over his arm and with his great hands tore the letter into shreds that went whirling and scattering in the wind all across the side of the hill. Had Christina read it? Cried Beatrice in dismay. No, Christina cannot read, nor I. She is crying at home. I told her I would bring the letter to you and tear it up before your face, to show you how much use it is to meddle in the business of other people. And she will never know what she said, Beatrice exclaimed. You took it from her before she could hear. You coward, you. Steady, my dear. A man's quiet voice sounded at her elbow, and she turned suddenly to see John Herrick. Anger won't get you anywhere with people of this fellow's kind, he said gently. If you wish to order a man off your grounds, you must do it quietly. So standing firm on the path, fortified by the knowledge that John Herrick was beside her, Beatrice had the strange delight of directing an impertinent intruder to drop her horse's rein and leave her premises, and of seeing him obey. For Thorvik went. He blustered, stammered, then finally relinquished Buck's bridle and marched away to the gate. He stopped before he passed through to hurl a defiance over his shoulder, but he hastened on immediately after. His threats grow the louder the further away he goes, commented John Herrick. Ah, I'm glad you came, observed Beatrice a little shakily. The incident had been an unpleasant one, nor could she guess what the result would have been had not help appeared from such an unexpected quarter. I'm glad also, he returned gravely. A strange creature who called himself a reporter stopped me at my door as I was starting for the village. He asked me a great many impudent questions, but he happened to mention that he had seen Thorvik going in through your gate. At that I rode off at once, leaving him with his mouth and his notebook both still open. Here comes our journalistic friend now. He seems to find this morning's sun a trifle uncomfortable. Very hot and wilted did Dabney Mills look as he came trudging down the path, his handkerchief stuck into his over-tall but exceedingly limp white collar. Yet his inquiring spirit still seemed undismayed. He stopped where John Herrick's nervous black pony was tied, peered over the fence and poised his pencil once more above a page. Won't you just tell me, he began. I have told you already, said John Herrick, that I have nothing to say. When the men get rid of the leader and come to me willing to work again, we will inquire into this matter of the company's finances. But while they are not in our employ, the company's money is none of their business. Until Thorvik leaves Ellie and the labourers stop talking of strikes, things shall stand exactly as they are. His tone was so final that even Dabney Mills realized that this was the end of the interview, and walked on, unwillingly in the direction Thorvik had gone. John Herrick caught Buck and gave the rein to Beatrice and went to untie his own horse, but hesitated a moment before mounting. His manner assumed suddenly a stiff shyness quite unlike his cordiality of a moment before. There is one thing more, he began. I've been away for some days, but I now understand that from Hester that your aunt, who is with you, has been ill. Is that true? Yes, assented Beatrice. She was puzzled by his change of manner, but she still felt that his kindness invited confidence, and she told him fully of the state of Aunt Anna's health and how concerned they were about her. I wanted to suggest, John Herrick went on slowly, that there is a doctor who lives on the other side of Grey Cloud Mountain. A man who does not practice now, but has been a famous specialist for just such illness. He could help your aunt, I know. He would come to see her if I asked him, for he's always been a good friend to me. Would you care to consult him? Oh, indeed I would. How kind of you. How wonderfully good to have thought of it, exclaimed Beatrice. She had seen the regular doctor of Broken Bow Valley, and had not felt that he could help them very greatly. "Oh, it's nothing," John Herrick returned, apparently somewhat disturbed by the eagerness of her gratitude. "It was just friendly interest in a neighbour." He went on speaking in a tone of rather careful indifference. "Dr. Minturn and his wife are very fond of my Hester, and she often rides over to visit them. It takes a whole day to go there and another to come back, but I believe she would like to take the ride with you. She was saying something yesterday about going to see them. I would fetch the doctor myself, but I cannot leave Ellie today. As he does not often ride to town for his mail and there's no telephone line, he is rather difficult to reach. If you wish to wait a day or so, I will gladly go to fetch him." "Oh no," replied Beatrice. "I will go today if Hester is willing. I feel as though I could not wait. And how can I ever thank you for everything?" There was a curious wistfulness in the look that John Herrick bent upon her, and a great kindness also. "You have taken up a rather large task," he said slowly, "taking it for the most part upon your own shoulders. I want you to know that, as far as it is in my power, I'm going to help you make a success of it." His shyness had dropped as suddenly as it had come upon him, and there was nothing but the warmest friendliness in his smile as he swung into the saddle. And I think I'm going to leave it there tonight. This is a pretty interesting story, so if you'd like to pick up where we're leaving off, you can, as always, find it on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes are released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.